Hello, so in this video I'm going to do a brief run through of Marxist explanations of crime. Obviously I can't go into everything in these videos, I'm just going to giving a brief overview with the key studies and concepts outlined. So before we get into some of the key studies, I think it's really important just to talk about Marxism for a second and what that means. And as sociology students, I'm sure you know this already, but Marxism is a structural theory, it's a macro theory, it's top down, and essentially it's all about class inequality because of capitalism. And if we think about crime, it very much links in with that. So we've got to think about class here. We've got to think about who is most affected by this thing, this social construct that we call crime and punishment. And it's about kind of who decides what is a crime, what's against the law, and who decides what the punishment should be. Who are those people who are most affected by those things? So, if we get going with this, to begin with, we'll talk about kind of conventional Marxist explanations of crime. So I've outlined it here, and if there's one line to remember about conventional Marxist explanations, it's the one here. The criminal justice system serves the interests of the ruling class. Okay, so the criminal justice system is, as Marxists see it, set up to perpetuate, to continue ruling class power and dominance, and as it says here, that official statistics are constructed to criminalize the working class. So that's what Marxists say, that yes, working class are disproportionately represented in official statistics, but that's because they are designed that way. And if you think about something like policing, we'll come on to this in a second, policing targets street crime. Who's most likely to do street crime? It's the working class. So the working class are purposely kind of criminalized. Again, we'll come back to that in a second. So if we start off with Althusser, talking about the ideological state apparatus and the repressive state apparatus. So this is a kind of Marxist explanation of how people are kept in order, how their behavior is controlled. So ideological state apparatus, it's things like the media. So through the media, it's like, think about socialization, and it's kind of, people are socialized, people are taught to behave a certain way. Althusser says this is in the Marxist society. This is teaching us to be kind of good capitalists. So in a capitalist society, it's teaching us to be good capitalists. The repressive state apparatus are those things that keep us in line through force. So the police, the criminal justice system. So when we're talking about crime, you could use Althusser and say, through the repressive state apparatus, Althusser Marxists would argue that the police are there to keep the working class in line. Building on this, Chambliss talks about the fact that the criminal justice system, legal system, laws are based on the protection of property ownership. They're based on private property, and therefore those people or the organizations who have the most property will benefit most from the criminal justice system, from the legal system. Okay. Snyder talks about how the capitalist state is reluctant to pass laws that might hinder corporate profits. So that basically the legal system, the criminal justice system is there to kind of just continue capitalism, to maintain profits for powerful corporations. And Snyder again talks about how we should think about corporate crimes, and that corporate crimes, if we look at harm, and I've got a picture here of kind of pollution, Snyder says that in terms of harm, the corporate crimes are the most harmful. If we look at, street crime, it's far less harmful as a whole, this is what Snyder argues, than corporate crime. And things like, you could link that to green crime and pollution and those kind of things. Okay, continuing with conventional Marxist explanations. Chambliss says that capitalism itself is criminogenic. So capitalism causes crime. And the explanation for this is that it promotes, so Chambliss says it promotes greed and self-interest. So we are taught to work hard, get ahead, it's kind of dog eat dog, that kind of thing. And I've just put here, could we link this to strain theory, even though strain theory is functionalist, but Merton's idea the goals of society, you could say, well, yeah, that's capitalist, the capitalist goals. So Chambliss there is similar in a way to strain theory, the goals of society, but Chambliss takes it a step further and says, we are going after these goals, and some people are forced to commit crime to get to those goals. Next on to policing. So Gordon talks about how the police support capitalism by neutralizing opposition to the system. Gordon also talks about how the police, go after the working class, criminalize the working class, and the reason the working class are criminal or are committing crimes is because of capitalism. They are kept impoverished by capitalism, and so they commit crimes, and then the police go after them. So Gordon says this is kind of capitalism um, uh, neutralizing any opposition, and it's working in favor of, again, perpetuating capitalism. Scratton, this is quite a straightforward one to remember. Scratton talks about the police being an occupying force in working class areas. The police are there to almost keep the working class under control. Okay, so these are conventional Marxist explanations of crime. What about evaluation of Marxist explanations then? So feminists say Marxists largely kind of ignore the patriarchy. What about the role of men here, and the idea that those in power might not just be upper class, but they're men? Left realists say that Marxists kind of are largely ignoring working class victims of crime, that Marxists aren't thinking enough about the reality on the ground. Who are the people who are most likely to be victims? And that's working class. So left realists say we need a more realistic solution, a realistic approach. And then a criticism of the point earlier that we talked about, from Snyder, a criticism is that there are some laws that benefit everyone. So health and safety regulation, for example, speed limits, maybe. What Marxists would say to that evaluation, though, is that those laws are in place really just to keep the proletariat happy. So they pass capitalism. Allows for a certain amount of legislation to keep the working class kind of in its place, to stop a kind of revolution, if that makes sense. Okay, so now we're moving away from conventional Marxist explanations and going on to neo-Marxism and radical criminology. So the main study here, and you could talk about, I haven't mentioned it here, but you could talk about the CCCS and the idea of kind of like youth subcultures and resistance. You could talk about that here in neo-Marxist explanations. But the main one is Taylor, Walton, and Young in the New Criminology. And what they argue, and it's a development of Marxism, they see crime by the working class as deliberate acts of resistance and rebellion against the capitalist system. So that working class criminals are forced into this because of capitalism, and they should be treated as almost like political prisoners, that they've been forced into it, and it's a deliberate act of resistance against the system. However, this has been kind of widely criticized, particularly by left realists, who say this is actually a kind of Robin Hood theory. It's romanticizing working class criminals. As I mentioned before, most victims of crime are working class. So it's not kind of robbing from the rich and giving to the poor. It's robbing from the poor and keeping for themselves. So it's kind of it's not a very realistic way of thinking about the real impact of crime in society. And then finally, we get on to left realist explanations. So this is a development of kind of left-wing Marxist thought, which is why I've put it in here. But it is different to the things we've talked about so far. So Lee and Young focus on the reality of crime for the working class. So they're thinking about victims. And they say that crime is caused by relative deprivation, which is the idea that you only know that you're deprived when you see others with more. So it's about constantly being bombarded with kind of ideas about what we should own, consumerism, all of those things, and then thinking, well, I want some of that. And I've done a video on the London riots, but the London riots, you could say, are an example of that relative deprivation. What did people loot in the London riots? They looted mobile phone shops and shoe shops, trainers and things, and that, you could say, is an example of relative deprivation. Another explanation put forward by Lee and Young is marginalization. That the people who commit crime are those who are marginalized in society through education, through employment. And so they kind of got nowhere else to go. They can't, again, this is a little bit similar to strain theory, isn't it? Don't have the means of achieving the goals. And then finally, subculture. So this idea that kind of criminal or deviant subcultures are formed, again, because of kind of lack of opportunity in some communities. And so left realists also offer solutions. So unlike Marxists and neo-Marxists, Marxists would say, well, the solution is a kind of revolution to get rid of capitalism, which is probably not very realistic. Left realists say we've got to kind of work within the system, things like a multi-agency approach. So schools should work with community police, should work with social services, even maybe the media, different groups in society should work together to try and overcome these issues. Also, kind of improved welfare, community centres, youth clubs, those things to give people more kind of opportunities in society. So that's left realist explanations. In terms of evaluation, Marxists, kind of conventional Marxists, would argue that left realists they are not really addressing the root cause, which is capitalism. And they say that left realism is like a kind of sticking plaster. It's not going to solve the thing. It's just trying to cover it up. And it also arguing that they don't focus enough on corporate crime. Okay, so I hope that was useful as a revision, just a brief revision video for Marxist explanations of crime. If you have any questions, please leave a comment. Thanks for listening.